The woman thought the worst had happened in the taxi that night.
All part of service.
But she didn't expect the most painful shock to come from the police call when they declared,
"You might have had sex with someone earlier in the night."
"There was no rape, you were just drunk and imagining things." This woman's name was Sarah. She used to be a vibrant office worker, but now she was trapped in the suffocating reality of being a single mother. Her relationship with her boyfriend was on and off. Her daily life revolved around baby bottles and diapers. She even jokingly said she was like a cow attached to a milking machine. She had lost her charm and self-respect as a woman. Tonight, she decided to go out for a bit. This was her first social activity in 9 months. After dropping her child off with her boyfriend, she attended a gay friend's birthday party. Under the influence of music and alcohol, Sarah experienced a rare moment of relaxation she hadn't felt in a long time. In the restroom, her friends urged her to try some cocaine. To avoid ruining the atmosphere and to ease the tension of the already stressed man, she half refused, half agreed.
There, now let me out.
This seemingly small decision became a crime she would find difficult to clear her name of later. After the party, escorted by her friends, Sarah took a taxi home alone. The streets of London at night were brilliantly illuminated, and outside the window, it was drizzling. Sarah's face was reflected in the car window, hazy and distorted. This seemed to foreshadow that she was about to lose control of her body and consciousness. The taxi driver was a middle-aged man, very talkative. Through conversation, he skillfully extracted information about Sarah, revealing that she was a single mother living alone. Shortly afterwards, he excitedly announced that he had won a large sum of money, £40,000, at the casino that night. The driver said he was very happy. Then he took out a bottle of champagne and said that he couldn't drink alcohol while driving. He asked Sarah to drink a glass for him to celebrate. At first, she repeatedly refused, but unable to resist the driver's insistence, she finally accepted the glass. As they passed an intersection, the driver suddenly braked, causing the champagne in Sarah's hand to spill, but he generously refilled the glass and told her to drink it immediately to bring him good luck. After she drank it, her head began to spin and her consciousness gradually faded. The driver parked the car outside a motel, got out, and sat in the back seat. He lit a cigarette for Sarah. In that moment, she clearly saw the driver's face. When Sarah woke up, she found herself lying in a hospital bed. She stumbled into the restroom and saw blood on her legs, her torn tights, leftover lubricant in her private parts, and excruciating pain. This cruelly revealed a truth she never wanted to face. She had been drugged and raped. Overwhelmed with panic, she rushed out frantically to find a nurse. She borrowed a phone to call her boyfriend. When he rushed to her, she pushed him away as if electrocuted, feeling utterly disgusted.
God. What do you mean think? By who?
By the cab driver. Me.
The despair and self-harm emanating from her very bones were heart. Accompanied by her boyfriend, she went to the police station to report the incident. But the police intervention offered no comfort. Instead, it opened up a second wave of trauma. The police's professional demeanor was cold and detached, as if they were handling an object. They asked detailed questions, even implicitly questioning Sarah about the possibility that she might have forgotten, due to drunkenness, that she had willingly engaged in sexual relations. Many people assume that after a victim reports to the police, the first reaction should be to arrest the perpetrator. But in reality, in many assault cases, the first person judged is often not the abuser, but the victim herself. The police ask her if she drank alcohol, did she come home late, was she dressed shabbily, did she look like a good girl? It seems only the perfect victim deserves sympathy. But the problem is that real criminals prefer to target the least trustworthy people. Then Sarah was informed of a more dramatic turn of events. The taxi driver took her, unconscious, to her old address, where she used to live. This was the same information she had inadvertently revealed in the car. They had coincidentally met a kind neighbor. Sensing something was wrong, they forcibly instructed the driver to take Sarah to the police station. In other words, the suspect personally brought the victim to the police station after committing the crime. The officers then ruthlessly crushed Sarah's last shred of dignity. The cold instruments, the emotionless sampling orders, the numerous scratches and bruises on her thighs glaring under the lights. The doctor even requested an anal examination. More importantly, the doctor was male. Sarah, with tears welling up in her eyes, resembled a tattered rag doll being manipulated. To avoid missing any hidden details, Sarah confessed to the female officer that she had inhaled a small amount of cocaine the previous night. But this act of honesty backfired. Her boyfriend was summoned to the police station for separate questioning. The police asked extremely difficult questions, directly targeting the woman's pride. They asked him if Sarah had a drinking habit. Was her private life in turmoil? They even led her boyfriend to speculate whether Sarah had done something wrong after getting drunk. Did she regret it and lie about being assaulted? When she got home, her boyfriend, who should have been her support, changed his attitude. His seemingly rational analysis was mixed with judgment. He doubted how the suspect could have proactively brought her to the police station. His tone, full of guilt, completely overwhelmed Sarah. What devastated her even more was the subsequent medical notification. She not only had to take medication for HIV prevention, but also emergency contraception. She called the female police officer in charge of the case to ask if they had found the driver yet, but she was told that the case had been transferred to another colleague. To seek justice, she personally went to find the neighbor who had helped her that night. The neighbor confirmed Sarah's terrible condition at the time, as well as his insistence that the driver take Sarah to the police station. Unexpectedly, the driver claimed Sarah had vomited in his car. The police didn't even register the driver's information and let him leave. The neighbor repeatedly argued with the police that Sarah's condition wasn't due to excessive drinking but rather drugging. However, the police coldly called an ambulance and let the neighbor go without even taking his name. The neighbor claimed that he could recognize the driver just by seeing a photo. With a witness, Sarah's hopes were rekindled. She anxiously called a detective but repeatedly encountered resistance. Even when she personally rode in a police car to identify the scene, she still felt the police's indifference. During the official questioning, Sarah appeared so calm and didn't cry hysterically that the detective in charge even whispered behind her back that she didn't look like a victim. She didn't cry. She showed no emotion. The real-life traumatic reaction is never the kind of hysterical crying seen in movies. Some people will break down and scream, while others will remain unusually calm, even able to talk and smile normally. This is because when people experience immense psychological trauma, the brain sometimes automatically enters a state of emotional freezing. This is a self-protective mechanism of the human body. Ironically, many investigators used Sarah's lack of tears as evidence that she didn't look like a victim. The police even violated confidentiality agreements and casually told her boyfriend about Sarah's involvement. The so-called concern from her boyfriend felt like a fatal blow. His point was that if she had been a good mother, if she hadn't gone out partying and touched illegal substances, none of this would have happened. Under pressure from many sides, Sarah's psychological defenses gradually crumbled, but she still had to try to appear strong, even tumbling around in the yard just to get a smile from her child. The final verdict arrived. The detective called to say that because the security camera footage was blurry, they couldn't identify the license plate. The forensic doctor couldn't obtain DNA, and independent tests didn't detect any common anesthetic components. Plus, Sarah had alcohol and cocaine in her system, which could affect the reliability of her memory. Based on these circumstances, the police decided to close the case and concluded that the driver, who had behaved in a law-abiding manner at the police station, was completely unsuspecting. They concluded that Sarah's memory loss was simply due to drunkenness. The detective's cold words were like a heavy tombstone, crushing Sarah's last glimmer of hope. She refused to take her clothes back and vowed that one day she would expose the truth. Just as Sarah was falling into despair, isolated and without help, the serial predator, disguised as a law-abiding citizen, stopped in front of another girl. At a late-night bus stop, Carrie had just said goodbye to her friends and was sadly smoking alone. Just as she was feeling sleepy, a black taxi pulled up in front of her. The devilish driver poked his head out, grinning broadly and appearing very friendly and approachable. Knowing that Carrie only had loose change for the bus fare, he generously offered to wait for her for a short distance since he was going that way. For a girl traveling alone late at night, this was like offering warmth on a snowy day. Carrie was grateful and got in. As soon as she got in, the driver offered her a cigarette. He used his lively personality to break the silence. He shared some rambling, nonsensical stories, even half-jokingly suggesting she become a model to make a lot of money. Shortly afterward, he repeated the same old story, pulling a thick wad of cash from his pocket and excitedly boasting that he had just won £40,000 at gambling. To celebrate, he performed a magic trick, producing a bottle of champagne, pouring a glass and offering it to Carrie. She wanted to refuse, but the driver, like a persistent adult, insisted. In this cramped and enclosed space, to avoid being impolite, she reluctantly accepted the glass of wine and secretly poured it onto the floor of the back of the car. The driver saw this and produced a small glass of vodka. Since since he had already waived the fare, she felt too embarrassed to refuse. She drank the entire glass. Afterward, she lost consciousness. However, based on her intuition about her body, she believed she hadn't been assaulted. At this point, Sarah was suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD). In the office, she would scream in terror when colleagues suddenly approached her. She couldn't stand the stares of strangers. Even taking the train to work became torture. What hurt her most was that even her boyfriend subconsciously suspected her. He said the difficult thing was that they weren't entirely sure what had happened. This statement was like a sharp knife piercing her last line of defense. Angrily, she packed her bags and took her child back to her own home. Then she hid alone in the backyard, burying her face in her hands and sobbing uncontrollably. But when she saw her little son, she could only awkwardly wipe away her tears and pretend that nothing had happened. Dancing with him, she pretended that everything was fine. Amidst the police's irresponsibility and the victim's suffering, the devil's hunt continued. This time, it was at a noisy nightclub. A female Indian college student named Laya felt extremely uncomfortable because she was menstruating. After taking a few sips of vodka ordered by her friend, she decided to leave early. She hailed that black taxi in the drizzling rain. The same old story, the same old trick. The driver once again recounted his casino winnings. He asked Layla to drink with him to celebrate. She repeatedly refused, saying she felt unwell. But the smile on the driver's face gradually faded, replaced by a terrifying threat. He parked the car under a secluded bridge, a stark contrast to his previous gentle demeanor. He violently covered her mouth and forced an unknown drug into her mouth. When Lila opened her eyes again, she was awakened by the deafening sound of her alarm clock. She was lying in bed in her dorm room, her head throbbing. Soon, an indescribable fear gripped her. She discovered that the buttons on her shorts had been violently torn. Even more frightening, the tampon inside her had disappeared. Her thighs were covered in blood, her knees and arms were riddled with strange bruises, but her memory seemed to have been erased, stopping only at the moment she drank that glass of wine. Encouraged by her friends, she decided to report it to the police. The school security quickly reviewed the security cameras and identified the black taxi. Just when it seemed the evidence was clear, the police's questioning was like a cold shower extinguishing Layla's hopes. The investigating officer, in a probing manner, threw out a fatal question. What if the man had drugged her right under the university's security camera and his identity was revealed? Not only that, when reviewing the camera footage, the police discovered an image that left her with no excuse. She was seen hugging the driver outside the car. Desperately, she explained that she had absolutely no memory of this. She firmly believed she had been drugged. But the female police officer asked her if she had drunk too much alcohol at the nightclub and then removed the tampon herself and forgot to put it back in. When tested at the hospital, she insisted that she had never touched any illegal substances in her life. If the test revealed anything, it was certainly because the driver forced her to drink it. However, the nurse said that because so much time had passed, no traces of any drugs were detected in her body. After the tests were completed, the police summoned the driver, John, as per the law. Facing questioning, he acted like an honest citizen. He calmly presented a flawless set of arguments, saying that Lila was drunk when she got into the car, complaining about men. He denied any contact with her. As for the hug, he explained that she didn't have money for the ride, so he kindly gave it to her for free. Out of gratitude, she hugged him. He even denied the glass of wine, claiming he only gave her water because she was too drunk. However, she insisted she had paid £30 for the ride as soon as she got in the car. That was money she had just withdrawn. The police could check at any time. Unexpectedly, the interrogating police became sexist and asked her to describe herself as a certain type of girl. Why did she wear red nail polish while waiting for the police to gather evidence? Lila became withdrawn. Meanwhile, John hid inside the house and repeated his shameless remarks over and over again. A few weeks later, the cold verdict was delivered. The DNA test was negative. The toxicology test found no traces of the drug. Worse still, Lila claimed she fainted immediately after taking the drug. Medically, this was considered impossible because anesthetics usually take half an hour to take effect. Based on all the evidence, the Royal Prosecutor's Office decided not to prosecute. Lila was completely devastated. But in the face of such cold procedures, the victim's intuition became too weak. Sarah understood this desperate, hopeless plea for help all too well. As time passed, she gradually emerged from the darkness and found a new boyfriend. However, during intimacy with her boyfriend, she always recalled the nightmare of that night. She could only hide in the bathroom to wipe away her tears. For her, the space of that car never truly disappeared. It became an invisible wall, separating her from the intimacy of the world. Perhaps each physical contact was a forced awakening of that night's nightmare. Time passed, and in February 2008, the case finally took a turn. Another victim had been assaulted by John. She mustered the courage to report to the police that the taxi driver claimed he had won money and had drugged her. However, during the subsequent identification of the suspect, the victim mistakenly identified the wrong person. But a careful detective, reviewing the files, noticed something unusual. He used a search system to find keywords: taxi, casino winnings, drugging. Immediately, he found 4 similar reported cases. The truth struck like a bolt of lightning, paralyzing the police system. A taxi driver with a valid license had exploited the police's trust in so-called law-abiding citizens, as well as their ingrained prejudice against drunk women, to commit heinous acts under the London night sky for years. Each time a victim mustered the courage to report a crime, it only resulted in suspicion and the case being dropped. Each time the driver escaped unharmed, he became even more complacent and fearless in his subsequent crimes. And while the police were blindly investigating, John's taxi stopped in front of 2 drunk women. 3 years passed in a flash. Sarah and her new boyfriend got married and had their second child. She forced herself to forget the humiliation of the past and tried to play the role of a good mother. But the devil hadn't stopped his evil deeds. In the back seat of the taxi, a black girl was looking out the window in terror. John finally changed his act and said he had won £30,000 on a lottery ticket. He enthusiastically offered her a glass of champagne, telling her to celebrate with him. But the girl only took a small sip before immediately realizing something was wrong. She spat it all back into the glass. When the car stopped, she desperately tried to open the door and escape. John finally tore off his mask of hypocrisy, revealing a lewd smile, and asked her if £5,000 could do it. The girl pounded on the car window, saying she had texted her husband, who was waiting right in front. Only then did she narrowly escape. In the police station's briefing room, the atmosphere was stifling. The superiors announced that after comparing the database, they had finally linked the 5 assaults together. But this belated realization angered the female officers present. The earliest incident occurred 3 years ago, and the perpetrator had been at large for 3 years. Why had they only just discovered the connection today? The superiors claimed they were avoiding responsibility and blaming it on a lack of routine checks. To present their so-called public relations plan, they even decided to wait 2 more days before releasing a press statement. And that very night, a girl named Carrie was assaulted again. She had become John's plaything. The news finally aired. Radio and television broadcast the police warning repeatedly. A devil driving a black taxi, using the clumsy excuse of winning money and committing assault, was hunting young girls in the dead of night. This news exploded like a bomb in every corner of London. The nurse who had previously examined Layla was trembling with anger after reading the newspaper. She immediately reported the incident to her supervisor and quickly notified the police. This was already the 6th victim. Based on the information Layla provided, the police eventually brought John to the station on suspicion of 6 counts of assault between 2005 and 2008. Shortly afterward, the police conducted a thorough search of John's house. In the trunk of his car, they found a large amount of cash and suspicious items. At the same time, Layla saw the news of John's arrest in the newspaper. This devastated her. That night, 2 women called the police station, confirming the identity of the monster to the police as the driver from years ago. One was Layla, the other was Carrie. The victim wasn't sure if she had been assaulted, so she didn't report it to the police. Sarah learned about it through friends. When she heard the description of the crime, memories from years ago flooded back like a tide. She confessed to her husband the secret she had kept buried deep in her heart. He advised her to report it, but she refused. The humiliation the police had inflicted on her that year was still vividly present. She didn't want to waste another moment of her life on him. At the same time, the police began questioning John, but he remained extremely calm. He even produced a pre-prepared statement denying all the accusations and claiming he was a respectable driver. All contact was consensual. The news exploded, overwhelming the police hotline. The number of reports skyrocketed from the initial 5 to 43. 43 lives ruined. 43 preventable tragedies. Lila was the first to arrive at the police station, but the senior officer who greeted her revealed a truth that infuriated her. That year, her case had not been transferred to the Royal Prosecutor's Office for consideration, contrary to what the police had claimed. All of this was a lie from the police officer handling the case. To evade responsibility, they had arbitrarily decided to destroy the case. Even more outrageous, the urine and blood samples taken at the hospital that year clearly showed traces of prescription sleeping pills, yet the police never mentioned this to her. They deliberately concealed this crucial evidence, instead implying in their testimony that her mental state was due to alcohol and drug use. Persuaded by her husband, Sarah decided to give the police another chance. But what she faced were similar explanations. Not only that, the clothes Sarah wore that night, the crucial evidence that could have yielded the perpetrator's DNA, had also disappeared from the police's evidence room. These mistakes weren't simply the carelessness of one police officer, but rather the result of a long-standing systemic failure. Because in the eyes of many, cases of sexual assault against women are always difficult to solve, complicated, and controversial. They don't easily achieve the same statistical success as theft cases, nor do they attract as much public attention as murder cases. As a result, over time, some cases that should have been seriously investigated began to be unconsciously sidelined. Victims gradually learned to remain silent, and the police advised them to file complaints with the Independent Police Complaints Committee. But Sarah and Layla knew very well that this was just the police investigating themselves, and it would yield no results whatsoever. Soon after, all the victims were gathered at the police station for identification. Sarah's former boyfriend, who had once doubted her, finally realized how much his past cruelty had hurt her. He sincerely apologized. The trial was about to begin. To ensure the conviction of this scoundrel, the prosecution employed the safest strategy. They selected only 14 victims with the most complete evidence and clearest memories from dozens of cases to testify in court. And Sarah, because the police had lost all the evidence years ago and the crime had occurred so long ago, couldn't recognize the suspect during the identification process. She was cruelly excluded from the list. She cried. She desperately wanted to stand in court, look that scoundrel straight in the eye, and say, "Yes, I will send you to prison because that's where you belong." The confrontation in court was a ruthless, bloodless massacre. The defense lawyer was extremely cunning and malicious. They seized upon every minute detail in Lila's testimony to exaggerate, questioning whether she was drunk and why she didn't resist. They even implied that she had actively seduced the driver. This humiliating attempt to exonerate her caused all the victims to clench their fists. As Lila walked out of the courthouse, a female reporter immediately surrounded her, hoping she would relinquish her right to anonymity and voluntarily give interviews to the media. This was not just rubbing salt in the wound, but adding fuel to the fire. Faced with the testimony provided by numerous witnesses, the judge finally pronounced the sentence. Considering John was extremely dangerous and showed no remorse, they sentenced him to indefinite imprisonment. The minimum sentence is 8 years. Most importantly, in the British legal system, to be eligible for parole in the future, a criminal must first plead guilty and show remorse. John still maintains that he was falsely accused. Therefore, it is highly likely that he will spend the rest of his life in prison. At least, that's what everyone thought at the time. But the truth wasn't yet fully revealed. The number of victims had skyrocketed to an astonishing 105. Police estimates suggested the actual number could even reach 500. If only the police had taken Sarah's report seriously back then. If only they hadn't lost that crucial evidence. If only they hadn't been prejudiced against women during the investigation, hundreds of these girls could have escaped their cruel hands. Sarah, Lila, and the other victims decided they wouldn't let it go any longer. They didn't want to use the hypocritical internal complaint channel to quell the matter. They wanted to make a big deal out of it. Sarah contacted a renowned human rights lawyer. Because the law prohibits suing the police for negligence, they had to find another way. They used the human rights law to sue the police department, alleging serious negligence that violated their right to immunity from inhumane treatment. Despite facing difficulties and even the risk of the statute of limitations expiring, they did not back down. They knew this was not only about seeking justice for themselves, but also about making the bureaucrats who had neglected their duties for a long time pay the price. After a long wait, the results of the police's internal investigation were finally released. The content was so outrageous that it caused outrage. The police officers who lost crucial evidence during the investigation falsified victim testimonies and even arbitrarily dismissed cases to avoid trouble received only a few written warnings as the most severe punishment. The police officer in charge of Layla's case claimed that Layla's presence was not detected on the bar's security cameras because they had mistaken her for someone else. Therefore, they believed Lila was lying. And the police officer in charge of Sarah's case even openly lied in his report, claiming that her lack of cooperation led to the loss of clues. The official police statement, filled with bureaucratic arrogance, claimed to have improved internal training procedures and guaranteed that similar incidents would never happen again. This perfunctory attitude thoroughly enraged Sarah and Lila. They decided not to back down anymore, not to be the lambs to be slaughtered. They assembled a team of top human rights lawyers, preparing to fight to the bitter end against the massive London Metropolitan Police in court. Meanwhile, when John met with his lawyer, he continued continued to deny his crimes and maintain his innocence, claiming that the women had all consented to their encounters. Sarah also discovered that the police who handled her case years ago had never received training in investigating sexual assault cases. This was like asking someone who doesn't know how to repair a car to take apart the engine. Not only would they fail to find the cause of the problem, but they could also damage already existing cracks. Before going to court, the senior lawyers arranged a so-called structured mediation. Lila tried to suppress her anger and questioned the police lawyer, arguing that after her attack was ignored, another 29 innocent women had fallen into the hands of the evil John. This tragedy could have been avoided. It was all due to the police's irresponsibility that year. The second injury inflicted by the police was even more painful than the assault itself. However, the police delegation remained expressionless, refusing to acknowledge any responsibility on the part of the Metropolitan Police. They didn't even dare to say that the police investigation into John was justified and ultimately brought the criminal to justice. Even more insulting was the police representative's suggestion to invite Sarah and Layla to train police trainees, sharing their experiences under the guise of education. The courtroom confrontation completely tore apart the hypocrisy of the police. The defense lawyer pressed hard at every step of the investigation into Layla's case that year. The police knew the case had all the typical characteristics of a drug-induced assault, but because the initial toxicology report was inconclusive, under pressure from higher-ranking police officers, they chose to close the case. Under pressure from the lawyer, the police officer in charge of Layla's case responded that if a case wasn't clearly documented as a serious assault, there was no need to enter it into the Criminal Intelligence System database, nor was there a need to write lengthy conviction reports. To pursue outward achievements, lower-level police officers were encouraged by their superiors to investigate easy-to-solve theft cases, thereby increasing the overall police department's case resolution rate. The innocence, dignity, and safety of the victims become worthless in the face of these cold, data-driven KPI targets. Destroying the lives of these girls is not just the work of a serial killer, but also of a cold, performance-driven system. When case resolution rates become a game of numbers, complex, time-consuming, and easily failed cases are instinctively eliminated by the system. The police's top priority is no longer those most in need of help, but the easiest cases to close. Sexual assault against women is precisely the type of crime most difficult to prove. Therefore, many victims, from the moment they enter the police station, are destined not to be taken seriously. Not only that, but the police in court continue to humiliate the victims. They bring out the blurry CCTV footage from that night, claiming that Lila was staggering and completely drunk, unable to protect herself. They even found it extremely strange and indecent for a highly educated woman to be standing on the street in the middle of the night receiving drinks from a stranger. This arrogance and deeply ingrained prejudice were truly suffocating. Although the lawsuit was proceeding with great difficulty, the traumatic effects of that year still lingered. Due to the long-lasting psychological trauma, Sarah developed an intense aversion and resistance to any form of physical contact. Finally, after a long and painful trial, good news arrived. The judge delivered a historic verdict. If it weren't for the serious work of the police, these women would never have been assaulted again. Sarah and Layla won a seemingly unwinnable lawsuit and also received a well-deserved amount of compensation. When Layla heard the good news of victory from Sarah over the phone, tears immediately streamed down her face. She embraced her newlywed husband tightly, amidst the cheers of family and friends, releasing the pent-up resentment and suffering of so many years. At this moment, they finally received the belated justice they had been waiting for. However, fate played a cruel trick on them. In the heavily guarded prison, John suddenly changed his attitude. He put on a spectacular, tearful act before the psychologist in charge of the assessment. He claimed that, under God's guidance, he felt immense guilt and decided to honestly confess to all his crimes. But the so-called truth he spoke was full of calculated maneuvering, avoiding the harshest aspects and choosing the mildest. He said that because his ex-girlfriend had abandoned him, he was emotionally wounded and had begun his revenge against society since 2006. He claimed that he only gave his victims half a sleeping pill each time because he didn't want to inflict too much harm on them. He shamelessly claimed that he had only assaulted one of the women and that the entire process lasted only 4 seconds. Such a bizarre and flawed lie managed to deceive the High Parole Board. Why did such a clumsy performance succeed? Because the parole system has an inherent tendency to judge remorse. Prison psychological therapies are geared towards novice treatment. As long as the offender learns a set of self-deprecating, religiously submissive, or emotionally obedient words of repentance, they are easily judged as low risk. This system is completely incapable of identifying high IQ sex offenders lacking deep empathy, because what they are best at is disguising disguising their emotions. In this moment of despair, a woman named Carrie bravely stepped up. She is now the director of public relations for the Conservative Party's press team in the UK. And in fact, Carrie is married to former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Before becoming the First Lady of England, she was actually one of the victims in John's case. Carrie leveraged her media resources and accumulated network of connections to start a powerful campaign. If government agencies chose to stand idly by, then they should mobilize the power of the entire nation. She quickly launched an online crowdfunding campaign, calling on society to provide legal support for Sarah and Layla. Thanks to the generous donations of countless defenders of justice, the case, which was almost certainly going to be decided, finally took a turn. At the Justice Review hearing, the lawyers representing the victims presented irrefutable evidence. The lawyers clearly pointed out that John repeatedly claimed to have admitted to all the crimes, but only to the cases for which he had already been convicted. He claimed he only started committing crimes in 2006, but confidential police records from that year clearly show the number of victims reached 105. More importantly, the irrefutable evidence provided by Sarah suggests that his crimes could be traced back at least to 2003. This enormous 3-year time discrepancy completely shattered John's mask of hypocrisy. Finally, the hammer of justice struck once again. The pardon was overturned. John was escorted back to prison. The film ends here. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you again.